Hi, it's Dr. Greg Emerson, and I'm back at the Harvest Cafe in Newrybar in northern New South Wales. Found a beautiful room to do our podcasts and videos from because these gorgeous brick walls don't echo like some of the rooms I've been in before. And yes, the Treat the Cause clinic was shut down, but she lives on in the new form, an evolved form as this YouTube channel and podcast. Another lesson that sometimes we can take a crisis and come out of it as a more evolved species, a more evolved structure, organization. So today we're going to do part 2 of You Can't Outrun the Virus, You Have to Outsmart It, looking at the 5th roadblock. We're going to talk to Blair again about the veggie boxes that the Harvest is collecting from local farmers and sending out to people who can't get out to restaurants anymore, and how that's changing family dynamics. People are sitting around with their family now and cooking with traditional foundational foods. And then we're going to talk about Ali, the head chef at the Harvest, about how you can incorporate some of these foods, and particularly the food we're talking about today is the foundational part of the 5th roadblock, into our diets. So if you're interested in any of that, keep watching because we're going to get started right now. Okay, so let's do part 2 of We Can't Outrun the Virus, We Have to Outsmart It. So what have we looked at already? What did we look at in part 1? Well, we looked at the fact about what a virus was, and we said that a virus is an envelope with a piece of RNA or DNA in it. And the goal of that virus is to attach to our cells and then inject its DNA or RNA into our cells. We also looked at the fact that we're surrounded by trillions of viruses, and viruses are never going to disappear. This virus was threatening us now is not going to suddenly disappear. I'm surrounded by 1 trillion viruses. I've just been down in Byron Bay now, swimming in the ocean full of 200,000 different species of viruses. They're always going to be around. We have evolved with them for 4.5 billion years. And we can't escape them. What we're doing with social isolation is that we're flattening the curve. We're minimizing the impact on our essential services of hospitals and doctors and nurses and paramedics, all of those people who will be overwhelmed if everybody gets sick at once. So flattening the curve reduces the spike in cases, but what we can do in the meantime to help support those hard-working people is that we can make sure that we don't get sick from this virus, because the bottom line is it's a virus just like the common cold virus. It's from the same family. We are all going to get exposed, but just like any winter, everybody gets exposed to the cold virus, but not everybody develops a cold. So we're going to look at what we can do to make sure that even if we do get exposed, we don't manifest a disease from it. And in the first video we did, we talked about the 4 roadblocks. We talked about the first one being vitamin D. And I've just got back from the beach getting some sun. It was an isolated beach. Nobody else was there, so I was still doing the social isolation. But what the vitamin D does is that it produces or it activates a protein inside macrophages. And remember, macrophages are the Pac-Men which go around and chomp up the viruses. And then cathelicidin, through vitamin D, basically breaks the virus up into little pieces so that macrophage can then present the virus to other immune cells to produce antibodies, so we don't get sick if we get exposed to the virus again. So roadblock number 1 is vitamin D from the sun to stimulate cathelicidin destruction of the virus in macrophages. Roadblock number 2 was vitamin A from cod liver oil, because that produces a cytokeratin skeleton around our cells to stop the virus getting to the cell wall. Roadblock number 3 was selenium, because selenium stops the virus from attaching to the receptors on the cell, because the virus has to attach to the receptors and then inject its RNA and DNA. If it can't get on the receptor, it can't inject itself. And if it can't get into the cell, then it can't replicate and the cell therefore can't burst and release more virus particles, which then creates the cytokine storm that makes us sick. Roadblock number 4 was iodine. What iodine does is iodine also, like selenium, stops the virus from attaching to the receptor, but it also prevents the virus from bursting out from the cell and spreading itself through our body. Interestingly, there was a workout 3 days ago published which showed that selenium was also required with vitamin D to activate cathelicidin and macrophages. So all these things do have multiple roles in the body, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on when we talk about food usually being the best way to source these minerals because of the entourage effect and balance, but we'll talk about that in a second. So in summary, it was vitamin D from the sun, it was vitamin A from cod liver oil, it was selenium from Brazil nuts or seafood, and it was iodine from seaweed or as an iodine supplement. So now let's go on and talk about the 5th roadblock, which is the incredible powerful mineral zinc, which is the second most prevalent mineral in the body after iron. Now, zinc has a number of different functions in the body. It's critical for growth, it's critical for skin health, it's critical for gut health, it's critical for the catalytic conversion of over 200 enzymes in the body, and it's critical for immunity, particularly for viruses. So let's have a look now how zinc protects us from viruses, and then we'll have a look at the best way to get zinc. So medical research is very clear that zinc deficiency is incredibly common in populations, and probably at least a quarter of the population are deficient in zinc. The research is also very clear. A deficiency in zinc profoundly increases our risk of getting a viral infection. So let's have a look at how zinc protects us against viruses. The first way zinc is antiviral is it helps our macrophages recognize what a virus is. So we said that macrophages were the first line of defense. They are the marines circulating looking for a threat. When they see a virus, they consume it, which then allows the cathelicidin stimulated by the vitamin D to break that virus up into small parts. Well, a macrophage has got to recognize a virus when it sees it, and how does it do that? Zinc has a critical role in the macrophage recognizing that the virus is foreign as in a threat. Zinc also works similarly to selenium in that it helps stop the virus attaching itself to the cell wall, and if the virus can't attach to the cell wall, it cannot stick its freaking hypodermic needle into our cell and inject its DNA or RNA into us. It's also directly, the studies show, antiviral. We don't know exactly why, but zinc does seem to be able to kill viruses directly. And the fourth way that zinc helps kill viruses is that it's integral in the production of a protein complex called metallothioneins. And metallothioneins actually, this protein structure with zinc involved, kill viruses, but also involved in detoxification of the body as well. And we'll talk about that coming up when it comes to food sources of zinc. And finally, zinc is involved in modulating the cytokine storm. So we've talked about the fact that if we do get an infection with virus, but we're not going to, but if we did, the virus causes the cell to burst open and release all the reproduced baby viruses, and then our bodies react with an immune response called a cytokine storm, and zinc helps modulate that so that cytokine storm is not excessive. So if you're low in zinc and the viruses burst out of the cells, you're going to get a much more severe cytokine storm, that terrible viral feeling with the muscle pains and the fevers that you get during a viral illness. So zinc helps mitigate that massive cytokine storm. So if zinc is so critical, and it's very critical, it's the 5th roadblock, where should we get it from? Well, the best source of zinc by far are oysters. Oysters, let's say 4 or 5 oysters, that's 100 grams, have 60 milligrams of zinc. When you're buying a zinc supplement, most of those zinc supplements have 25 25 milligrams in a capsule. So 4 oysters has 60 milligrams of zinc. It's an amazing dose of zinc. It's about 800% of the recommended daily allowance of zinc. What else are oysters full of? Oysters are also got copper in them. Now, one of the problems with zinc supplements, and why I don't talk about them a lot, is that zinc supplements, zinc and copper are on a seesaw. And if your zinc goes up, your copper goes down. Now, high copper can cause people a lot of problems, but also low copper can, as low copper will cause immune problems. That's why the body packages minerals together in a balance. That's why oysters have got a lot of zinc, but they also have 7 milligrams of copper in it. So you're not going to get that zinc copper imbalance that you might get if you're just taking a zinc supplement. That's why we should always try and get our minerals from food. Remember what we said in part 1, healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. And the food gives us 2 benefits. It gives us the balance. Nature packages all the minerals together in a balance that our body recognizes, so we're much less likely to get an imbalance in those minerals. And the second reason we want to get it from food is what's called the entourage effect. If you take an isolated nutrient, an isolated phytonutrient, an isolated mineral, then you're not going to get the same benefit as when nature packages them with all the other phytonutrients and all the other nutrients that all needs to work properly. You're taking one thing out, you're looking for a drug effect. We're not looking for a drug effect, we're looking for a balanced entourage effect, because the benefit of that is that infections can work out solutions. They mutate quickly to one threat. When you're getting your medicine from food, you're giving them a multitude of threats all at once in a balanced format, which is why that's our preferred way to prevent infections. And finally, oysters are a rich source. About 90% of our RDA of vitamin D can be obtained from oysters. So you want to be super healthy, go down to the beach on your own, get some social isolation, eat some oysters, eat some seaweed. You're going to get huge amounts of vitamin D, you're going to get huge amounts of zinc, you're going to get huge amounts of selenium, and you're going to get huge amounts of iodine, the 5 roadblocks. Now, I can hear some of you saying already that you don't like eating oysters. So next we're going to talk to Ali, who's the head chef here at Harvest, about some ideas how you can incorporate oysters tastefully into your diet. Luckily, we've just been joined by Ali, the chef from the Harvest Cafe. He's originally from Scotland, not Ireland like I originally guessed. I'm allowed to say that because my great-grandfather came from Limerick in Ireland, so I'm allowed to default to the Irish first when I haven't quite picked up the accent. So you were telling me you live in Bangalore now?
Indeed, yes.
Big difference to Scotland.
Very warm community that we live in, and it's close to work. It's beautiful to live here. You know, we're surrounded by a really wonderful community, and for myself as a cook and as a chef, we're surrounded by amazing produce, and we have a lot of face-to-face interactions with local farmers, and you know, farmers markets on a bi-weekly basis is a normal way of life, not just buying for the home but buying for the restaurant as well. So that's something that's really important to what we do at Harvest in terms of our food ethos.
Great. And I really wanted to get your expertise today on oysters in particular.
Yeah.
Because we've just been talking about how oysters are our richest source of zinc in our diet. But I do recognise, and I'm one of them, that oysters might not be everybody's favourite food. So I want to talk to you about some ideas that you might have, how people might be able to incorporate oysters in their diet if they don't like the idea of picking up some slimy mollusk and slipping it straight into their mouth.
Sure, yeah.
It's a tough gig for you to win us over, but go ahead.
I mean, the most straightforward answer for someone that's struggling with oysters in the raw state is cooked. So when I first was introduced to oysters, I was probably a chef by this stage, and they are confronting for anyone that's not tried them before. But really excited by the flavour of them, but obviously the texture can be challenging for people. So I was introduced to them in very high quality restaurants in the form of a lightly poached oyster. So what we would do is, while shucking the oyster, we would retain the juice that comes from the oyster and then strain that off so there's no shell. And then when it was time to serve the oyster to the guest, you would warm that oyster juice, drop it in, and then pull it off the heat and just let it poach, So then you take it out, and it's got all those beautiful flavours and nutrients, but a firmer texture, So it's like there's just this little meaty piece that you have to have a go of.
That works for me.
Definitely. Another way, something that was done quite recently at Harvest was an oyster broth. So basically we've had fish stock, so from fish bones, and infused it with seaweed. So we'll get some kelp from the beach, put it in there, so that brings nutrients and some really nice umami richness to add to the flavour of the sauce. And then what we would do was shuck the oysters and actually keep the oyster itself for later on, and all that oyster juice is infused into the broth, some lemon juice, some other little bits and pieces of chefy goodness, and then at the end we would serve a piece of fish with the oysters poached in that sauce, and then all that goodness and all that richness and deliciousness.
Well, that chefy goodness is a great idea, because we were just talking about how iodine is one of the critical 5 roadblocks as well, and people think that seafood is high in iodine, but it's not really. Seafood is high in selenium, but the richest source of iodine in our diet, of course, is seaweed. So now you've solved that problem. We were just talking about how people should go down the beach and eat some oysters and eat some seaweed.
For sure.
So now you've told us a good way that we can all incorporate some kelp into oysters. What else can we do with oysters?
If you're really struggling, get down to the pub and have some Kilpatrick's.
You're obviously slightly biased against Kilpatrick. So
it's not really my cup of tea.
Right.
For doing them at home, what I'm talking about is quite restaurant focused and quite refined. To do them at home, cooked on the barbecue. This also helps to shuck them for you. So if you put a whole oyster over your coals in the barbecue, it will start to cook in its shell. So it's cooking in its own juice, which is incredible. And then eventually the shell will start to pop by itself. And then at that stage you pull it off, and you'll see there'll be steam just kind of oozing out of it. Just give it a look, nut with the oyster shucker. It's good to go. And and then you can throw that through. It could be something as delicious as a raw salad, or you could have something more fulfilling, like a fish curry that we're talking about earlier. And that kind of salty umami flavour really enhances the seafood dish. Because of the natural flavour of the oyster, and then it's also bringing in those nutrients as well, which is fantastic.
I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast once, and he said that when a lot of the Irish and Scottish people arrived in New York, there was no work and they had no money.
Sure.
And they were looking for a new start. But New York appeared to be an extraordinary place to grow oysters. Well, they were growing naturally. And a lot of New York is actually on reclaimed land from oyster shell. And they were saying that, you could go down to the banks of the river and pick up 4 or 5 oysters, which was enough for a man to get through his day on nutrients alone. So it's been a big part of our heritage in a way, particularly in the United States. Which are the big oyster eating cultures in the world? Where are the I suppose the Japanese must be.
Listen, I think it's oysters are a worldwide phenomenon, but coming from the United Kingdom and having worked in other countries as well, the oyster farming practices in Australia are exemplary. I've visited a number of oyster farms in South Australia and in Tasmania as well, and so down to earth and so organic in all the practices, but the attention to detail that the oyster farmers put into it gives them a fantastic result, and we really lucky to connect with a number of individuals and procurers around this region that source the best quality oysters nationally for us. So basically we look for you know, the basically the best of what we can get at the right time of the year, you know, and depending on which farm that's coming from, focusing on what's nutrient dense, what's full of flavour, what's got a, you know, fantastic shelf life on it for it to travel well and reach your restaurant and get to the customers in great condition.
Have you tried the New Zealand bluff oysters yet from down near Queensland?
No, not tried them.
Oh!
Incredible.
Oh,
yeah. What are they like?
That's the one of the size of your fist almost.
Yeah,
that's the real
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
That's the real amazing thing. I like them. They're so big. I really want to address now two quick things that the people always talk to me about, and I'll talk about one in particular, the heavy metals. But talk to me a little bit about the concept that oysters are filter feeders and therefore full of toxic waste from the ocean. How do we address that on these farming practices?
Yeah, I think you know, from my knowledge, that it has to be, you know, clean water.
Okay.
That's been, and if there's been any issues in the past, it's really kind of stemmed from impatience, you know, so rainfall will bring toxins that are undesirable to the oyster through from, you know, the surrounding environment, and they'll take that on. So if the farmers aren't patient enough for them to essentially be purged, then they can be a risk, or, you know, at risk of deteriorating more quickly, etc.
How do they purge them, or do they just purge themselves when the water cleans up?
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
you just got to wait for the water itself to clean up a little bit.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And the other concern that I want to talk about was the heavy metals. And oysters do have some heavy metal problems, particularly mercury, but not nearly as much as everybody thinks about. But here's the really interesting thing, which I love, because we've been talking about how nature packages things together for a reason. And oysters are also high in selenium, and selenium is one of the ways that we detoxify heavy metals. So not only you're getting your good nutrients, but also the oyster is giving you a way of getting rid of the heavy metals that it gives.
Sure.
And oysters, we said, are also hugely high in zinc. And zinc, we talked about previously, creates metallothioneins in the body. And metallothioneins are the main way that we get rid of heavy metals from the body. So yeah, we get a little bit of heavy metals perhaps from the oysters, but heavy metals are ubiquitous in nature now, remember. But it also gives us our primary way to get rid of heavy metals from our body through natural detoxification mechanisms with the metallothioneins. Plus, all of us should be trying to get as many saunas in as we can today, because we now know the massive health benefits of detoxification from a sauna. Also a great way of getting heavy metals. So you can take care of any heavy metal risk that you can get from any food by having oysters to maximize your metallothionein production, getting lots of selenium, and having saunas. So nature, once again, gives us solutions for problems that might come along with it.
Incredible.
All right, Ali, well, thanks so much for your expertise.
Thank you, Greg. Wonderful.
I hope lots of people come to you guys and support you guys in the future, because it's an amazing facility and you guys do the most amazing food, and I'm here as often as I can getting that lunchtime, that smoked, slow cooked lamb and and the lettuce that you do, which I just think is a phenomenal meal. Just amazing. So thanks so much for your time today, and thanks so much for your cooking expertise.
Thanks, my man. Cheers.
So, now that we've talked about zinc and oysters, and now that we're back in this lovely Harvest Cafe in Uribar, we're back now with Blair, and in part one of You Can't Outrun the Virus, You Have to Outsmart It, we talked about a new paradigm of food, and Blair was talking about the food boxes that he's now collecting from local farmers and delivering to people. And one of the things that's going to come out of this crisis is going to change our relationship with food, and it's going to change communities, and Homo sapiens, as usual, are going to adapt and survive and come out of this stronger. And Blair's leading from the front with that. So Blair, while we've got you for a couple of minutes, can you just this is a veggie box that we've had put together. Can you just run us through some of the things that you're putting in your veggie box?
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost with the veggie boxes that we're putting together is what can we get locally. So I'm lucky enough to have a relationship with a lot of the farmers in the area, because I've been living in that space with them for some time now. I know what they grow. So I've contacted them. Having relationships with them means that I trust them, respect the way they grow. It comes from healthy soil. So they're our first port of call. If we can't supply, from them, then the next port of call is just knowing who they are, understanding their methodologies, and there's no way that anything in this box has any herbicides grown with herbicides or any petrochemicals. That's the big no-no, and anything above that we make our own discernments, and by judging and looking at their methodologies and practices. So most of the boxes have foundational produce in there. At this time and where we are right now, I think that's what people are looking for. I could fill it with a whole bunch of really interesting exotics because we can grow them in the subtropical region. It's something I'm really passionate about, but people don't know how to use them. So go back to basics, get your potatoes in there, your sweet potatoes, your zucchinis, your cucumbers, your eggplant, your tomatoes, your corn, heads of lettuce from down the road, turmeric, garlic, ginger, mix the salads from Conscious Grounds down in Myocum, which are super tasty, super nutritious, and that's sort of how we'll roll season to season. There'll be a whole bunch of stuff that's not available soon, but those leafy greens and those cooking greens will be coming up soon, so you'll be getting your chards and your kales. So it's kind of educating people about what seasonal eating is, because that's how we roll. It's kind of like going back to circadian rhythms, but same with where our food comes from, and then being able to skill people up on how to cook seasonally. And it's really turns out being a really beautiful cycle and a really exciting cycle.
Right.
And once people start to understand what those cycles of seasonality are, you really look forward to what your winter veg is, and then other interesting things drop down throughout, and that convenience aspect of our food gets obliterated, and we start to have relationship with the products that are coming in. And it's not that expectation of I want it and I want it now. And then when you do get things that you're looking forward to eating, which might be winter crops, you really appreciate them being there and cooking with them, because you know that their time will come, and then the spring crops will come through. So for me, that's adding a lot of value and a lot of relationship to our food. So this is sort of our first offering around that, and we'll build it out, we'll get better at it, and we'll encourage farmers to jump in. So soon this entire box might have a 10 kilometre radius. At the moment probably has about a 40 kilometre radius right now.
Well, it doesn't matter what I teach, and I teach this, doesn't matter what Weston A. Price discovered in the 1920s, it doesn't matter what they found in the Blue Zone studies about the longest lived people around the world. There was a commonality running through all of them, and that was that food was local, it was organic, it was traditional, or as you said, foundational, it was unrefined or minimally processed, straight out of the ground, and then it was seasonal. And it was also eaten around the table with people you love. And that's all we're going to find that come out of this crisis. We're going to go back, because we're going to be forced to much more traditional, foundational eating habits. We're going to sit around the table and prepare our unrefined food, which is local and seasonal. And hopefully with people like you leading the way, that this, not only are we going to move forward into better eating habits, we're going to start to better support the local farmers and people like you who are going to great lengths to try and get us through this crisis, as usual, as Homo sapiens come out better on the other side.
Sure it is, man. There's parts of it which are so exciting. Like, my kids aren't at school at the moment, as an example, but they're now part of the cooking regime at home, and it's so wonderful. And I'm looking at other families and other people that maybe that's not how they normally work, but that's where they're going, and they're going to sit and look each other in the eyes every night and connect. And that's the beauty of what the life experience really is. And suddenly our values change, and we have a reset about what's really important to us. So thank you for bringing this in.
All right.